Hello and welcome to the 17th episode of Death Row Executions. I just want to start off by saying that you guys are super awesome. Less than a month ago, I said yay to the first 100 subscribers, and today another big yay for 1K. Thank you guys so much for coming along this journey with me, and I hope you enjoy the stories to come. Today's story is on David Thomas Dawson, who was executed in 2006 in the state of Montana for a triple homicide. David declined to take part in any interviews leading up to his execution, so there is nothing on his early life. Dawson was born on October 20th, 1957 in San Diego, California. By his late 20s, he moved to Billings Heights, Montana from California and was not living an honest life. He began working as a construction worker and was into theft and the drug scene. On April 16, 1986, the Rodstein family checked in to room 149 at the Airport Metro Inn Motel in Billings Heights, Montana. The family consisted of 4 family members and their little dog Tigger. The youngest was 11-year-old Andrew Rodstein, who was a 6th grader. Next was Amy Rodstein, who was a 15-year-old high school majorette. Then there was 39-year-old Monica Rodstein, who worked for the Billings Heights School District as an administrative assistant, and her 39-year-old husband, David Rodstein, who was an engineer. David had just been offered a new job in Atlanta, Georgia, so the family was only planning on staying at the Metro Inn Motel for 2 days before heading off to their new home. Just 2 days later, on April 18, 1986, Dawson checked in to the same motel under his alias, John Monroe. He checked in extremely early in the morning at 4:45 and was given the double bedroom right next door to the Rodstein family in room 151. During the same time of Dawson checking in, the Rodstein family was packing and ready to check out. Amy Rodstein came out of the hotel room at around 5 a.m., just 15 minutes after Dawson checked in. Amy was carrying luggage to load in one of the family cars, and regrettably, she was spotted by Dawson, and he walked up behind her with a gun that was poking out from his duffel bag and told her to walk calmly back to her hotel room. Dawson made it inside room 149 and told the family, "Calm down, I need your money, we are going to the next room." It was later reported that he never pointed the gun at anyone, but they all visibly saw the gun was there, which is why they all followed every direction. The family ended up in Dawson's room and they saw tape, socks, and bandanas on one of the beds. These were the items used to tie up the family members and to gag them with. 15-year-old Amy was left untied while she was forced to bring all of the family's belongings to Dawson's room. Once she was finished, Dawson bound and gagged her and put her in a separate part of the room from her brother and parents. Dawson then turned on the TV and raised the volume very loud, put a do not disturb sign on the door, and started collecting everything he could from money to jewelry and credit cards. He then got a syringe full of an unknown concoction of drugs and put it inside of a syringe to inject David and Monica. David asked Dawson what he was doing, and Dawson replied by saying that he was going to give them all something that would make them fall asleep. He would take their money, and then they would later be found by maids. He kept reassuring them that everything would be okay and nobody would be hurt. He injected David first, and when it was time to inject Monica, she kicked him and tried to scream, but Dawson told her, "Calm down, everything will be fine. Before you know it, I will be gone and you will be back to your normal life." He injected her, and when David and Monica both fell asleep, he strangled them with the motel telephone cord until they were dead. After killing them, he moved their bodies to the bathroom near the sink and put a chair in front of the door as pictured here in this diagram. Before closing the door, young Amy was able to see her parents laying down in a 6-inch pool of blood. A little while later, Dawson mixed his drug concoction with water and made 11-year-old Andrew drink it all up. After Andrew fell asleep, he too was strangled to death with a telephone cord and placed in the bathroom with his dead parents. After killing 3 members of the Rodstein family, Dawson made 15-year-old Amy follow him to the motel parking lot where the Rodstein family cars were located. They made 2 trips and parked both vehicles behind a gas station that was nearby. When they made it back to the hotel room, he tried to give Amy the same liquid that was given to Andrew, but while Dawson was not looking, Amy poured out the drink on the bed and covered the wet spot with a pillow and was able to stay awake. Being that she was never knocked out from any drugs, Dawson continued to hold Amy captive for 2 days without attempting to kill her. During the next couple of days, Dawson drove around town to different people's houses, his own apartment, and stores, all while leaving Amy in the car unrestrained. On one occasion, while she was left in the car alone, she looked inside Dawson's glove compartment and copied down his social security number and full name on a piece of paper that was inside of a cassette tape. She was thinking of escaping, but felt that no one would believe her story and was overall just scared. On Saturday, May 19th, police in Billings Heights received a phone call from family members in Atlanta saying that their relatives never made it and were worried. 24 hours had passed since they went missing, and police were thankfully right on top of it and went to the Rodstein's last known location, which was the Airport Metro Inn motel. They arrived at the motel at around 11 o'clock at night and were able to find the Rodstein family cars, which was identified by a neighbor who was there to help. Detective Hatfield was lead investigator on the case and confirmed with the front desk clerk that the Rodstein family was assigned to room 149, but they assumed that the family just left without checking out, so they ended up assigning the room to a new person. The clerk, for some reason, felt that it was important to also tell the detective that she rented a room to a man by the name of John Monroe right next door to the Rodstein family and that he had a black Volkswagen Bug. Detective Hatfield went outside to the cars that belonged to the Rodstein family, and another detective walked up to him, telling him that the man in room 151 had come in and out of his room 3 times and looked suspicious. So this was the second time he was being told about a John Monroe in room 151. Dawson gave Amy a blanket and pillow and made her hide in the bathroom with Tigger and told her not to move because he had to check something out. Minutes after that, Dawson, aka John Monroe, was outside, so Detective Hatfield began to question him about the owners of the cars. Dawson told Detective Hatfield that he didn't know anything about the cars or the owners. The conversation ended and Dawson walked away. Shortly after this first interaction, Dawson returned to the parking lot, but this time he approached Detective Hatfield and told him that earlier that day he had helped a young girl between the ages of 12 and 29 start her car and that he witnessed someone messing around with cars the previous night. After this second interaction between the two of them, Dawson left back to his room. Sometimes I think criminals are either extremely genius or really dumb, because if Dawson was really trying to blend in, coming in and out of his bedroom 10 times was definitely not helping him look innocent. Detective Hatfield stayed outside to examine the Rodstein vehicles, and while doing so, other officers went to check room 149 and all of the unoccupied rooms on that side of the motel. One officer ended up going to room 151 and knocked on the door. Dawson came out and gave the officer his real name, which was David Dawson, and told the officer that the only reason he used a fake name was because he was having an affair with a married woman. He also said that he noticed the vehicles that belonged to the Rodsteins and that they were moved. So he went from confirming that his real name was John Monroe and not knowing anything about the cars to confessing his real name and admitting to knowing about the family and their cars. Because of his off behavior and telling multiple officers different stories, they began to grow suspicious of him. The officers got Detective Hatfield and updated him on the encounter, so he decided to go knock on room 151. David Dawson opened the door, and he was no longer wearing any clothes and only had a yellow towel wrapped around his waist. Detective Hatfield asked if he could check his room, and when Dawson questioned why, Hatfield responded by saying that they were looking for any type of evidence that would lead them to find out where the Rodstein's location was. Dawson said no and took a step back, and Detective Hatfield walked in. Side note, this was actually important because during his trial, they questioned whether or not Detective Hatfield entered Dawson's room and proceeded with an unconstitutional search. Detective Hatfield said that when Dawson slowly backed away, his body language gave off the impression like he was inviting him inside. With that being said, Hatfield asked Dawson if his mistress was in the room, and Dawson replied by saying no. When Hatfield came further into the room, the first thing he noticed was that both bedspreads were off the beds and piled on the floor in a corner. Dawson spoke up on his own accord and said, "The bedspreads are in the back of the room." Detective Hatfield said, "Yes, and why?" Dawson then immediately said out loud, "Amy, they are here to help you. You are going to be okay." Dawson and Hatfield stared at each other for a moment, and Dawson told him that she was in the bathroom. Hatfield knew that Amy was the name of the missing teen in the family, so he instructed Dawson to stay where he was and walk towards the bedspreads on the floor, and that is when he noticed feet protruding from them. He waved for officers to come in the room. He lifted the sheets and covers and found all three members that were killed and still bound and gagged. They then proceeded to the bathroom where they rescued Amy, who was unharmed. Amy later went on record and said, "I was very scared. I thought that the next person that opened the door would be Dawson to kill me or do something. It was very horrible, very scary." David Dawson was arrested on site. The following year, in 1987, the trial began, and by March 1987, he got his conviction and sentence of death. Amy was a brave young girl and testified, and they also concluded that Detective Hatfield acted with reasonable cause in terms of questioning Dawson and entering his motel room. A couple of years later, in 1989, the Montana Supreme Court affirms Dawson's conviction and sentencing on an appeal, but the U.S. Supreme Court denied their review. It wasn't until 15 years later, in 2004, when David Dawson's attorneys let the Supreme Court know that he wanted to be executed and wanted the court-appointed expert to determine whether or not he was competent to drop all of his appeals. 2 years later, in 2006, which was after his competency hearing, Judge Todd allows for Dawson to drop his attorneys and forego any appeals. They also concluded that he was competent and had no mental health issues. Despite Dawson wanting to die, an attorney by the name of Ron Waterman files in order to stop the execution from happening. He was with the ACLU, but the following month after their suit, a judge ruled that they did not have the legal right to intervene and the execution would be set. The last hearing was on August 9th of 2006, and Dawson's execution was set for August 11th, just a couple of days later. For Dawson's last meal, he had 2 bottles of Dr. Pepper, 2 double cheeseburgers, 2 large French fries, and a half-gallon of vanilla fudge ripple ice cream. When he was asked if he had any last words, he said no. After 18 years on death row, David Dawson met his fate on August 11th after dying from his lethal injection execution.